Okay, so hi everyone. I received a few comments via DM and a little bit on my YouTube, but my YouTube is not for like Star Stable anymore, so I thought I'd just do it on my IGTV. And some of you were asking about shading and how I shade. Which is a compliment, I guess. So thank you for that. Anyway, and some of you guys, the questions you asked were really good. It's just I didn't really know how to answer them because for me, shading starts at the very beginning, right from, picking a reference. So, I thought I'd maybe. Wait, someone's coming. I thought I'd maybe go through my kind of editing process, but only focusing on the shading, not so much any other stuff on this current edit, which I'm gonna hopefully finish in a week, which will definitely be a challenge because I've literally only done half of a horse on my other edit that I'm working on, this one. And this is my definitive style, so I'm definitely gonna keep going with this type of style. So yeah, this is the kind of look that I'm gonna keep going for. As you can see, this leg isn't shaded, and I've spent 4 days on this, and we're literally like barely even halfway with the horse. And it still needs a rider, but luckily it's for July 13th, so I still have quite a bit of time. This one is for July 6th, so not so much, and I need 2 horses and a rider. But anyway, the first kind of, just ignore what I'm doing on the screen right now. I'm just erasing kind of the extra bit so that I can start shading. But the first step for me in shading is when I pick the reference. When I'm looking for the reference, I not only look like, oh, is it a good angle? Is it a cute picture? Does it tell a story? But I also look at the horse and the rider and how the light behaves on the reference. I tend to avoid picking reference pictures that have people, or no, no, I tend to avoid references that have little contrast, and I tend to avoid references of horses that are pintos, Appaloosas, any nice patterns like that, and then I only use those types of references if I'm adding a pattern. And that's because when the horse has a pattern, it becomes very difficult to kind of, how do I say this, to see the shading. And this is why it's important to have a reference for shading. You need to be able to see where the lights and darks are, where the lights and darks are on the horse and the rider. You need to be able to see that in order to create an accurate and good, shaded, well-shaded kind of horse or object. So yeah, I also tend to avoid gray horses just because there's usually less contrast in them. And I was actually struggling a bit for the shading on the shoulder because, as you can see, there's very little contrast, so it was definitely hard to see the lights and darks. So yeah, that's why I also tend to avoid certain types of horses when looking for a reference, but I feel that once you're comfortable, you know where the muscles are, you kind of get familiar with it, then you can try ignoring kind of the patterns of the horse and the color of the horse, where you can kind of just increase the saturation, and not the saturation, the contrast while you're shading, rather than having like a, I don't know. Anyway, so now that I'm done doing this, I can start shading. So, I just check all my settings, and you can see here that I have a color palette. And this is not the next step, but it's also really important to have a color palette prepared. So I have this little document, and as you can see here, this layer says Pico color palette. because I'm editing Pico, and I got the colors from his in-game model, the Trackener, and I made them, you can see that with my edits. Sometimes Pico was too dark, which he was in my first Longines edit, the edit of him with his tongue out, and then I started trying to lighten his coat a bit with my one of him and Orion. But I never really came to, in those 3 edits, he didn't really have a definitive color. And so I knew that Pico was he's a light bay. So, I Googled horses that are light bay, and I kind of modified the colors on the Trackener to, not only lighten them, but get them kind of more exact to the effect that I wanted. And I finally got the light bay effect that I wanted, and I knew that I had to save this color palette because it's very difficult to recreate the exact same color palette. So I recommend, before you even start editing, take the in-game model of your horse, take the real-life version of your horse, try shading like a tiny bit of the horse. It doesn't have to be good, but just try and see how the colors kind of respond to each other, and if it's relating or looking more like the real life version and how the real life one is kind of shaded. And then from then on, it's good to pick these types of colors. So first of all, you need a middle. Oh, that's not what I was trying to do. So the first thing that you need is this middle coat color, and that is your base. So here, the middle coat. This is the exact same color as the base of the horse. And what I think I did in the past, and what I think some other people might do, is they just completely overlay the base of the horse, which is not correct. Like, they completely cover the base, which you should not do. You can see here, there's still parts of the base coat there. The lights, the shading is mainly just to kind of help add kind of texture, I guess, not to completely overrun like the base color. But I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense. But then after the base, you want to have the like a tiny bit lighter and a tiny bit darker. And you want to use that, as you can see here on the coat, you want to use that as guidelines. So where are the lights going to be? Where is it kind of darker? So I kind of blocked in the lights and the darks, and blended it a bit just so that it flows better, but you don't want to overblend it. So here, when you're looking at it, you might seem like, oh, she needs to blend it more, which don't do it. Just trust the process, and you can always go back and blend it. And then the next step is to have that light color and that dark color, and then you pick one step lighter and another step darker. And then, if we can see here, I have another layer. So that's the first layer. It's called the shading base, with the slightly darker and slightly lighter. We can just block in the lights and darks. Don't worry about details, just light and dark, but don't completely overrun the base. Like here, there's still some of that base coat there. Only do the parts where it's really light and it's really dark. And then I have the second layer, which I named Second Dark, and basically I pick the darkest color after that, so it would be this color, and I will just go over the darker parts of the horse, and I'm slowly like decreasing the area that it covers. So here, you can see that I made it a lot darker, and then I also, where it's a lot lighter, I started adding a bit more light bits. And then I take another step darker and another step lighter, which is the lightest and darkest parts of the horse. And I'm doing all of this with an airbrush on about 3% opacity and about the size of 45, 50. Not too big, so that you can still kind of see the definition. And see, with the third dark, I really put the really, really bright spots, and the really dark spots. And then we come to the details layer, and you can see that all of a sudden it has all of this extra shading. And for this, I actually just use a pen brush with a pen fade in and out on Fire Alpaca. And I go in and I say, there are wrinkles there, so that must mean I must draw the wrinkles. It's really dark here, there's a crease, so I make it really dark, and I never over blur it. So if I zoom in here on the face, you can see that it is blurred, but you never want to blur it too much. You want to be able to see all of those lines, like so. So I'm going to show you guys how this works if my Fire Alpaca stops lagging. Right, so I have my base layer and I have my airbrush, just checking the size. I need to go back to freehand, checking the size and all, making sure the opacity is the way I want it, and we're gonna focus on the face. So as you can see, like the reference doesn't have too much contrast, but actually my previous edit is in roughly the same angle. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the reference and just shrink it and move it closer to the actual horse that I am shading. And so you can see I have their heads next to each other because I'm planning to do their heads. So the first step is on the base. I forgot which one. Okay, so for the nose, we're gonna pick a base color of this, which Pico's nose is mostly like gray, but it does have some pink on it, which basically just follow the same process. I still need to make a color palette for that. And you basically just go over all of the parts of the nose that, you know, are gray, and all of the parts of the horse that are gray. So we also have his legs that need to be darker because he's a bay. So you might be like, these legs are a bit sharp, and this is when I use the smudge tool, because I usually use the blur tool, but this is when I go in with the smudge tool, make it just a bit bigger. It doesn't need to be 100% strength, just whichever setting you're comfortable on, and I just kind of drag it upwards so it looks more like that. And then he does have a white marking, but I'll get into shading that another time. It's basically just the same process as this. I just do it on a different layer, and then I just blur that out like so, which I didn't do the legs very well on my other horse on that other edit. Anyway, and then I just go back and I do the same for the eye. As you can see, there's not too much gray around this horse's eye, but I like to go a bit and overboard, I guess, and add just a little bit more gray towards the outside, just because of the horses that I've seen and met in person. They tend to have a little bit more gray in their eye. And then I remove the line art layer, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but when you're making the line art, you need to block in the lights and dark. So can you see here on this horse's face, there's a really dark line. So I drew that dark line in. I don't just leave the line art to the shape. I block in, okay, this line means that it's going to be darker there. This line means that it's darker. And this line means that it's darker. So you basically kind of have to draw that as well with the reference. Okay, so now that I'm kind of done with the base, the base layer, I'm going to create a new layer and just put clipping mode so that I won't go over any of the horse. And let's start with the nose, actually. So I'm just going to take this color palette and just move it upwards. Now I'm going to be honest, the nose is not my strength when it comes to horse edits, but it's important to practice as well and find your own technique. What I do is not going to work for everyone. Okay, so the light seems like it's coming from kind of this way, so we're going to use that idea. It's also good, like, so based on how the horse is shaded, I'm going to assume that the light is coming from the left corner. Okay, so time for the nose shading, and am I on airbrush or blur? Right, so here I'm just kind of outlining it a bit more, and then we're going to go with the slightly darker color And I'm just going to kind of make it smaller just so that it fits. You can see it's very, oh, that's the wrong layer. Make sure you're on the correct layer. And just pick, okay, like it's darker here. There's some dark lines here. So I'm gonna make that darker. Like that. You can see slightly darker. And then even darker. And then I can even increase the opacity a bit if I feel like I'm not getting kind of the darkness that I want in this layer, but you don't want to go too dark on the first layer because you're just blocking in. You're literally like just blocking in the lights and darks. So here it's going to be darker, and inside the nostrils obviously going to be darker, so we can just go ahead and shade that already, but I usually just fill it in for like the final part on the detail layer, and I'm not going to name this layer shading base, and don't ask why I do it in all caps, that's just how I roll. I feel like I'm much better at shading the fur, so maybe I should have done that instead, but it's the same process. So yeah, and then here I'm going to make it a bit smaller just because of this line. And so here we have some wrinkles, right? And that's fine. All I'm just going to do is literally just like do that. See, there's usually like not too much contrast here, and I just add the marking again on a separate layer. You know, this one is a bit difficult because this part's supposed to be light, so I'm just gonna like select that and make sure it's still a bit light. So there, I basically just go through like that. That's a bit too dark. I'm gonna lessen the opacity. And then, so that's part of my base mapped out. Then I'm going to pick, well, I picked that color. So I'm gonna go and choose slightly lighter, and then just kind of mark in where the lights are. See, I don't do this without a reference because usually there's a light spot next to the dark, and I know that the nostril is gonna be really bright by just looking at the reference. And I know that this part's gonna be quite bright. If we look, the nose is very bright. Now this image isn't really that high quality, but when you're looking for a reference, it's definitely a lot easier to shade when it's quite high quality, so that's definitely something I'd recommend. You can see at the bottom it's not too bright, so I'm just going to add 2 lines, nothing special, and I'm just going to go back in and fix some of the shading. The dark. Done. That's the first layer done. And I'm going to decrease the blur to maybe 26%, just so that it blends. I don't want it to be like completely blended, just a little bit like that, just so it's a bit smoother. Just like that. That is literally the first layer done. So now I'm going to create another layer on top of that and press clipping again. Let me just get some water. Okay. Sorry, I've been sneezing a lot because of allergies. Okay, so the next step is the second dark. That's just what I like to call it. So this is the base, this is our first dark, and this is our second dark. And basically, you might have noticed that I haven't picked another color after that, and that's just because it's very difficult when the colors are already quite dark, especially on black horses. So I tend to just decrease the opacity and go along with it, and I just check, you know, the line art layer again so I can see it. And the nostril of a horse is never completely black. There's going to be some parts of it that are lighter. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're doing it. So here, and I know it's going to be very dark over here, just because it's underneath something, so that means that that thing will pretty much have a shadow on it. And then again, just kind of following where the darks are, like here on the edges especially. And then it's important too to kind of see what it looks like without the line art, just so you can, tell whether you're in the right path or not. And you can probably be like, I don't really see what you're doing. And that's okay, just because there's not going to be immediate contrast. You have to build it up. So I'm going to check this line art layer again. And then just go back and kind of shade where it's really going to be dark. So around the nostrils, usually quite dark because of that shadow. So like that. See, nothing too special. You're literally just going over and over again on top of these layers. And then, without the line art a bit, just follow along where you initially made the dark spots with the line art. Like so. And by the way, you don't need to have like a special drawing tablet or anything like that for your drawings to be good, because I'm literally using my trackpad and my finger. So, you're fine. Like, basically my technique is with one hand I press down on the trackpad, and then with my other I just draw, just so that I don't have to press down and draw at the same time. So yeah, now it's time to go in with the lights, and you also want to like slowly kind of decrease the size of the airbrush, I think, just so that, because usually there's very few spots which are very light. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind. So like that. Doing up here a bit, just because there are wrinkles, so, So, look at that. You have really light up there. And we don't want to add too much light here at the bottom, so just a little bit around there should be fine. And then you're done with the second layer, and you can see it's slowly building up. And you also set the blur to very, very low. Again, and oops, I feel like I've made a mistake with my shading there, so I'm just going to go back and fix it. Not a big deal. Done fixing it, and then I really blur. I'm literally using a blur that's on size 20, but you can also, like, if you have a larger area, you can also just increase the blur intensity. Okay, so the next layer is the third dark, and I don't need it too much on, the nose, but it's definitely going to be a lot more useful on the actual coat. But basically here, I'm actually just going to make it just a tiny bit darker, but it's not something that I need to make a whole color palette for, because it's literally going to be the exact same color. I'm just changing the thing, and that's only for the nose, by the way. Okay, so here we can see it's quite dark. Just gonna lighten it a bit. Still a bit dark. Gonna decrease the airbrush. This is actually still quite dark, but it's fine. See there? Ooh, that's very dark. You never want to go too dark. Again, without the line art, just kind of checking in. And you might think like this looks nothing like the one with a lot of details. And that's because the details are literally what comes next after this, so don't worry. You can see just really fixing this up. And this one we're gonna have to do a bit more blur just so that it fades a lot better. And I actually do something kind of bad when it comes to drawing this actual mouth line. So, stay tuned for artist bad stuff. Okay. So here again, I know it's going to be super dark inside the nostril, so this is really when I'm going to make it dark. Just like that. That should be dark enough. Because we're going to add even more details after that. Okay, so like that, around the nostril. Like so, gonna make it smaller, do this wrinkly part of the nose again. And then remove the line art. And I don't think I'm gonna put any more lights. I really should, but I'm not going to for now. I'm gonna do that on the details layer. Actually, no, I'm gonna put some lights. Oh my god, talking so much, literally, I have not spoken this long for the longest amount of time. So you see, I'm being very, very selective about where I put these lights because, you know, you put a light or a dark in the wrong place and it can literally like mess up the entire proportions of your drawing. So you want to be very careful where you're putting this stuff. So yeah, just slightly blending it, looking at that. We're almost done with the nose and it's been like 20 minutes. So we're gonna add another layer, and this layer is gonna be called details. We're gonna switch. So because I'm on Fire Alpaca and I don't have like that pressure setting, I'm using this fade in, fade out brush, and I make it quite small. So like a 6 is still kind of big. So okay, we'll start with like a 3 or a 2.6. We'll actually make it more of a 3. Yeah. And I'm going to take the darkest part and I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. And from my horse line art, I can see where the darkest lines are, so I'm literally just going to follow them. Just like that. And then if you want, you can also add like some more, like this one. I've seen some horses have that kind of dip there, so you know, here also, just because it's under, like, but you know, I need to do that. There we go. Perfect. And that's literally all the dark spots there. Now we're going to outline the nostril. You don't really need the line art by this stage. I think it's definitely like useful because well, because you can clearly see like where you're supposed to shade, not just basing it off airbrush, which is very not really, doesn't have really defined lines. Just like that. Look. So I used to do hair with this, but it was very painful for my fingers, so don't recommend. We'll make it smaller and then just do the outline of the nostril. Now this is a layer that you want to be very, very careful about how you blend, because this layer can easily be messed up and turned into just another kind of airbrush layer, which is not what we want. This layer is supposed to show the big contrast in the details. So as you can see, I'm erasing a lot of the lines and I'm just really trying to get them right. Like that, and then I'm gonna just do some more down here. Oops. Let's see. You don't want to just say, oh, that's fine. You want to make sure it's perfect. Otherwise, it could literally mess up your entire edit. Okay, so now we have most of the darks. Now, for the lights, I go very small. I go like 1.8 pixels, even less. Just because there's like very few extremely light spots. So here, I'm just putting them in like so. Okay, so for the nostril, this is where I tend to pay the most attention to because it has the lightest parts and the darkest parts, so kind of just do that around the nostril. And then I'm gonna make my blending even like around 16 actually, so that you can see there how it looks. It doesn't want to completely blend into like another airbrush layer, which is fine. That's the effect I'm going for. So there you go, you have that, and then here you have that. Now it's okay to want to have it a bit more blended, but then you just have to go back and fix the parts that you accidentally over blended, and never over blur. Like, it can literally just mess up everything. Just be very careful with the blur. See, it's already looking like it has quite a lot of detail, but I'm literally going to go back and add even more. No need to create another layer. So yeah, I'm actually gonna add even like really light. So yeah, never use pure white. Just a heads up, just don't do it. Just because it's not gonna look too good. I'm having literally like well, maybe let's use 1 pixel of very light gray, like it's almost white. And that'll hopefully literally there. Now I say never use pure white, which is true, and I stand by that. I never really use pure white. But you shouldn't really be using pure black either, because nothing is like pure black, but it's a bad habit that I do. So if I do it, I'm not going to tell you guys not to do it. See that? It's a bit more blending. Maybe I'm just going to add a bit, like, actually, maybe I shouldn't have done that. No, it's a trial and error. You need to find your style. You can't just keep, like, doing it the exact same way as other people, because that's not going to make you unique. So yeah, I don't like how light this nose is, so I'm just going to increase the blur. It kind of blends out a bit more. That. And then I'm actually going to add some light spots, but I'm not going to use as light. I'm literally going to use like the light from the second dark. And then I'm going to add in some more darks. I'm going to go even like super dark here. You can see it looks black, but it's literally like it's not. Very close though. And then again in the nostril area, I'm making it really small. Just like that. And this tutorial is literally already 30 minutes long, and it's just the nose, so you can tell why my edits take a while. So I'm really trying to be careful with what I do with them, and you don't need like an expensive program. Like, Alpaca is literally free, so don't waste your money. And Alpaca is great. There are some things that I wish it had, but I've been using it for a while, and I'm fine with how it works, and it's outcome. So yeah, and if you're not satisfied with an edit, don't post it just for like, well, I mean, you can post it if you want, but I mean, like, make sure you're really happy with the edit before you post it would be my advice, because it's not gonna make, like, if you don't like your account and what comes up on your account, then that's really not good. And I do have a few edits that I don't like, my first couple, but I'm not going to delete them, like, just because they were my first couple of edits, and definitely shows progress. So yeah. Oh, I need to increase the blur there. So there we go. Okay, yeah, so it's about time that I go, because my laptop's gonna die and my mom is calling me. So yeah, I will see you guys in my next edit, and that's basically just how I do shading.